Hey everyone, today I'm gonna take this beautiful picture of Noel, cliffs of Mother Ireland, and I'm gonna turn it into a very dramatic and very dynamic picture just like this one, while explaining to you every single step I do from the very start to the very finished and fully edited picture. Alright, two things that I immediately want to change, and first thing is just to make the horizon straight, and that already works a lot better. And then the second thing is to bring the white balance into the blues. And I'm gonna adjust it later, but for now I really like this bluish kind of look, especially for the water, and I think it works overall for the mood, especially compared to before. And then of course, since we have such a bright sky, I'm gonna bring down the highlights to at least recover quite a bit of them, and I'm actually also gonna bring down the overall exposure. Now this might make the picture a little bit too dark in certain places, but overall I really do think that it works, and it works a lot better for the overall mood, it makes it a lot more dramatic. So I'm just gonna leave it at around there. And in terms of contrast, now before I adjust contrast, I'm gonna raise the shadows just so we have more detail in every part of the picture to work with. Also a thing that I really love to do, and I think I'm gonna raise it by quite a bit, around plus 75 here, and you see that way we just get a lot of detail in the shadows to then adjust other sliders further. And speaking of other sliders, contrast is definitely needed in this photo. It makes everything pop a little bit more, and it really just works. And in terms of blacks, now I don't really think that I need to bring down the blacks, because then it almost becomes a little bit too much. I think just leaving them at 0 actually works the best. Then the whites, I usually like to bring up the whites. In this case I'm just gonna do it a little bit, because I don't of course want to have anything clipped, but I also want to remain this relatively dark mood. So let's see, clarity. Clarity is always very difficult. I think I'm just gonna leave clarity at 0 and straight away go and grab an adjustment brush and add a little bit of clarity here. Always want to make sure that your feather is to 100, and then I'm just gonna paint over some portions here in the water, as well as on some of these cliffs, but not on the left. And you see the difference. I've just painted over here, and here's before that adjustment and here's after. Really love the structure, especially in these very small waves right here. I think that works really well from before to after. I really like local adjustments, because that way you really make your picture interesting. Everybody can move some sliders, but really by adding the right amount and the right type of local adjustments, you can make your picture truly unique and really get the most out of it. And then let's finish up with the basics adjustment by just playing around with the vibrance and saturation slider. I generally like the vibrance slider a little bit more because it adds color more subtle, but sometimes it actually works better to go with the saturation, because they kind of affect different portions of the color in your picture. For the overall look, I was thinking about just going into the minus saturation, but at the end I really like the look of this very saturated blues and also these green tones. And I think I'm just gonna leave it at a little bit plus saturation here, and I'm gonna go straight away down to the split toning tool, and here I'm just gonna go into the highlights and I'm gonna try to add a little bit of warmth. Now reason I'm doing that in the split toning tool instead of just the temperature slider up here is because the split toning highlights really just affect the highlight portions of your picture a lot more, while the temperature slider really adjusts all of the values very evenly. And of course, by adding more colors in the highlights, you will often end up with a way more natural look, because of course that is where the color is coming from naturally. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of orange tones here, really nothing too much, and that way we really balance out the blue tones. We still remain a lot of the blues, but at the same time we get a little bit of warmth back into the picture. So then let's go back to the tonal curve here and just play around with this slider. I really love to bring up the highlights because it really adds a lot of dynamic in the sky, and I see a lot of people are kind of scared to change the slider because it makes everything a lot more bright, but really just look at the dynamic and the actual effect and not the overall exposure on the picture, because exposure you can always change very easily. So I'm just gonna add a little bit here, around 30, and play around with the rest of these sliders. Really love the look of bringing up the lights as well, especially in the foreground. In the sky it's kind of too bright, but once again I'm gonna fix that in a second, and then the rest of these sliders really just see whatever works best and just stick there. Point curve is another thing that you could adjust, that it really adjusts just the very small and very fine structured contrast in your photo, but oftentimes, especially if you have very dark rocks like this here, it can sometimes be a little bit too much. So I'm just gonna leave it at linear here, and let's see, before the tonal curve adjustment and here's after, it looks a lot more dynamic, but it also makes the sky too bright. So there are a couple of ways you can fix that, either by grabbing an adjustment brush and just painting over the place in the sky where you want to lower the exposure, or the way I like to do it is just by grabbing a graduated filter and just dragging it over the sky. Now of course pretty much just the entire right portion is overexposed, not really the left, but I'm still gonna bring it over the entire sky, this filter, because I actually want the left to be relatively dark, because I really think that works a lot better for the overall lighting scheme, and that really gives a lot of interest. So I'm just gonna drag it over here, make a decently soft edge right here, and then I'm just gonna fine tune with the exposure, but also with the contrast, because that way you really can add even more interest in your picture and even clarity sometimes if you have a very dramatic sky. Let's see, before that one graduated filter and here's after, you see it works a lot better for the overall exposure, and it really balances out sky and foreground. But there are still some few spots that are a bit too bright, so I'm gonna grab an adjustment brush for that and just go a little bit into the minus exposure and draw over the parts where I want it to be even darker. You can always adjust the value, that's the great thing about editing in Lightroom, and yeah, I think that works even better. And if I go here into the history and I try to find where I started with the tonal curve, alright, so this is before any tonal curve and any graduated filters or adjustment brushes for the sky, and you see it's a lot brighter, and at the end we have a very dynamic yet very balanced and very dramatic kind of look. Of course, you could always go back after adjusting that and maybe even bring the highlights even more to the right, but I'm gonna keep it relatively simple for this picture. And I think I'm pretty much done with the global adjustments. Let me think. You know, there are a lot of tools that you could use but have a very small impact, so I'm just gonna kind of leave that out for this tutorial to keep the video as short as possible. Lens correction is always a thing that I like to do, is click on remove chromatic aberration to get rid of the purple and green fringing on the high contrast edges. You should be able to see it pretty well, especially here from before to after. Just check that box, really a great thing. And profile corrections is also a thing that I like to do just to enable it, and that way we will just straighten out any distortions of your picture, and I think that works a lot better. Now there are a lot of other different things you could do, but I'm just gonna finish up with the global adjustments with the detail tool here, and for that you definitely want to make sure that you zoom in 1:1. And the first thing that I always do here is go to color and just bring that slide into the right. Now this is a thing that probably a lot of people don't use, but it has such a huge impact in your photo. From before to after, you see the difference, how everything looks a lot more clean. And what this does is it gets rid of the green and purple sensor noise in the picture. It's really a thing that is almost in every single picture, and and you only really see that it was there in the first place if you bring it to the right. So it looks a lot cleaner. Then the next thing, it would be noise reduction, but I would just add that if it's really necessary, because it gets rid of so much texture, so much detail, and so much sharpness of your photo. So once again, would just use that if you really have to. But sharpening is definitely a great thing, and I like to add a little bit of sharpening in any case. So let's zoom out again and bring lastly the masking slider to the right while holding down the Alt key, and that way you will get the masking slider for your sharpening, and everything that is white is going to be sharpened and everything that is black is not going to be sharpened. So you see the entire portion of this cloud right here is not going to be sharpened. Generally I like to say that you shouldn't sharpen water, but if it's a very textured water just like this one, it can oftentimes even benefit. But in general, you just want to make sure that you don't have any non-textured surfaces selected, such as this cloud, a very soft sky, a long exposure water, you know, anything like that. So I think I'm done with the global adjustments, and now is the fun parts. I'm gonna go even deeper into the local adjustments. And the first thing that I always like to do is just look at the picture and see where is the light coming from, where is the light hitting, and how could I exaggerate that while really not making it look unnatural, but really just making it a lot more dramatic and a lot more interesting. So in this case, obviously the light is coming from the right, and you see the left isn't really darker than these portions right here, and I really want to change that. Now I do that by grabbing a graduated filter and just dragging it over the left portion of this picture. And if you do that, you definitely want to make sure that you have a very soft edge, and then I just go into the minus exposure. Now you might have to take different graduated filters to get the effect that you want. For example, here I'm just gonna go one stop into the negative exposure, and then grab another one, a very small one, over just the very left portion, and go even further down into the negative exposure, and that way you really create a lot of depth. And if I show you before these two adjustments here, right there, and here is after, I think it works a lot better for the overall lighting scheme, and it makes everything just look a lot more dramatic. The way to even enhance that look would be to grab another graduated filter and this time bring it in pretty much parallel over the other side of the picture where the light is actually coming from, and just going a little bit into the plus exposure. Now I don't really want to do this too much. In some pictures you need it more than in others, but I'm still gonna add just a little bit. And you see from before that adjustment to after, it just all looks a lot more organic while making the whole picture a lot more interesting. And I think we're nearing the end. I'm gonna grab another graduated filter and just drag it over the very top portion of the sky and go into the minus exposure, and that way you really can try to close out your picture. It doesn't work all of the times, but in this case I really do think it works actually, and you can try to do the same thing for just the very bottom of the picture. I really love to add custom vignetting rather than just going to the global vignetting tool, because you have way more control over every single edge and every single amount and strength of it. So let's just quickly see before any graduated filters, and here's after. Really huge difference. I mean, that really is game changing, and I think you will understand now why I love these graduated filters so much. Another thing that I've noticed is that this part of the sky that we've previously added an adjustment brush on and brought down the exposure is still a little bit too bright, so I'm gonna go even further into the negative exposure here, and that really works even better. And then I think the last thing that I'm gonna do here for this picture would be dodge and burning. Dodge and burning is making individual parts darker or brighter. I've made a full tutorial about that, link in the description, but usually I really like to use the radial filter for that, But just for the start, I'm gonna actually use an adjustment brush in this photo and go into the plus exposure. And the reason I'm using the adjustment brush first is because I want to make this entire top portion of these cliffs a lot brighter. And you know, I really love the radial filter for kind of smaller adjustments and also for the extra flexibility, but for just very broad adjustments, very large portions of your picture, sometimes the adjustment brush can work a little bit better. So I just want to increase the exposure here, of course still want to keep it natural, and then I am going to add maybe even a little bit of clarity. And yeah, so let's just see before this one adjustment brush and here is after. It just gives the whole picture a lot more dynamic. And speaking of dynamic, I'm gonna add even another adjustment brush with minus exposure, and this time just go below this line where I've added plus exposure. So that way we really get a nice differentiation from the bottom being a lot darker and the top being quite a bit brighter, and that way you really get a lot of dynamic. So if I show you here before any adjustment brushes in this cliff area, and here is after, it looks a little bit obvious at first, but once you look at it for a while, you really should start to perceive it as looking good and natural. So then let's continue with our dodge and burning with the radial filter, and here you just want to make sure that your feather is to 100, and I really like to just enhance some smaller bright spots in the first hand, and you know, really just add some interest. Right click duplicate and just see where does it work. A very important thing is that you always go with the lighting scheme. You don't, for example, want to add a radial filter in the very dark portion and then just go into the plus exposure, because of course that won't look natural. So you always want to make sure that you go with the overall lighting scheme, and you can stack these, you can make a smaller one over a bigger one, and it's really awesome what you can do with that. I think I'm gonna do everything while recording actually and make this a very in-depth edit, so you really see every single step I do. And the very important thing is that you never go too far with it, and that's why I love the radial filter as well. You can just go to each and every single radial filter separately and then adjust the value without actually changing any of the value in the other filters. So I'm just gonna make it a little bit quicker here, and you definitely want to make sure that you don't overdo it, so I might have gone a little bit too much here. And you know, there are so many different possibilities and you really could go crazy with it and spend a lot of time doing that, but I'm gonna keep it relatively short here for this video. Another thing that you shouldn't be afraid of doing is, for example, also going the sky and making some portions brighter here. For example, here I really like this spot being a little bit brighter because it really gives a lot of dynamic in this case. And another thing that you can try to do is to grab a very big radial filter, just kind of like that, and just drag it from the sky portion to kind of the foreground, and that way, you know, you will increase the dynamic of your picture even more. It sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't, but in this case I actually think it does work if I don't overdo it. So then, I think I'm done with the plus exposure radial filters. Just as important as the plus exposure are the negative exposure, and here I just go over the shadow portions and make them even darker to really add a lot of interest and, you know, complexify the whole lighting scheme. And by doing that, you also get a lot of contrast between the plus and negative exposure areas, and, you know, you make your picture overall even more dramatic. So I'm gonna just finish that up here. Don't really think there are too many needed, maybe just some very small ones on the very top right here, and gonna right click duplicate, drag one over the top of this edge right here, and maybe add a very last one right there. So then, let's see before any radial filters, and here is after. You see, it may look a little bit obvious at first, but once you look at it for a while, it really starts to look natural and it really complexifies the whole lighting scheme in your photo. And I know I said that this is gonna be my last thing, but I think I'm just gonna add some custom vignetting with the adjustment brush and go into the minus exposure and really just add quite a bit into right here and make it look all natural at the end, and even add some more in these left portions of the sky. So I think I'm pretty much done here. Yeah, I definitely think that's a really cool picture. You know, there are a lot of things that you could do. For example, grab the spot removal tool and kind of get rid of these sensor spots and dust and dirt spots, but I'm not gonna do that just to keep the video short, and also there's really nothing to explain there. Another thing that I might just try is to grab an adjustment brush and add a little bit more blues over just the ocean right here. Now that's definitely too much, but I think if I just add a little bit, it kinda actually works. Let's see here. Before, Lightroom is kind of slow, so here's before that additional blue tones in the water, and here's after. I think I went a little bit too far, but just a little bit works even better. So anyways, really time to finish this video, so let's go here into the history and see where we started at. And I mean, this is no comparison from before to after. It's really a huge difference, and always keep in mind that you don't necessarily have to go quite as far as I have gone to get this sort of rough look. You know, you can go half with all of the sliders that I've gone with and still end up with a pretty cool picture. Of course, you could always fine-tune the split toning at the end as well. So yeah, once again, here to the left is before and to the right is after. Really a hugely dramatic, very dynamic picture. And as some of you may have noticed, this is a JPEG file actually, so not even a RAW file. With a RAW file you could go even further, but generally speaking, it doesn't matter if you have a RAW file or a JPEG for the overall look, of course, for the detail and for the sharpness and everything like that. It does play a huge role, but just for the overall look, it will be pretty much the same whether you have a JPEG or a RAW file. But anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Be sure to get subscribed if you haven't done so already, so you will never miss a video again. I make everything from landscape edits, Lightroom tutorials, black and white edits, some other photography related videos in the future, so definitely be sure to subscribe. And of course, thank you very much for submitting your picture, Noel. It really was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed the end result. And of course, thank you to you all very much for watching. I hope you at least could take some tips or techniques out of this video to use in your own edit. And yeah, go out there and take some awesome pictures, then come back to Lightroom and make an even better picture out of it. I hope you have a great day, and of course, as always, take care.